Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope you're safe and sound wherever you are in the world and things are going okay for you and yours. Thanks for being here as always. The Interlull is over. It's done. It's finished. Kaput. That is the last Interlull that we're going to have until March of next year. I just left a little bit of silence there for you at home or walking the dog or in the gym. Are you in the gym? I don't know. Wherever you're listening to this, wherever it might be, a chance for you to make an exclamation of relief, a kind of or a phew, one of those. Because this last interlull has been absolutely, unquestionably, irredeemably painful. Because it's taken so long. It came off the back of that really terrible result against Aston Villa. We've had issues with players going all over the place, with injuries, with fatigue, with travel, with a couple of Arsenal players, Mohamed El-Neni and Sead Kolasinac, testing positive for COVID-19. So within this, what feels like an extraordinarily lengthy 2 weeks, there's been an awful lot of just pain. And now, it's over. To be replaced with, well, probably a different kind of pain. The pain that only Arsenal can inflict upon us, but over the years which we have grown accustomed to and inured to and kind of battle-hardened to, we've got a shell around us which allows us to take this pain. Maybe, though, maybe, there'll be the opposite of pain, whatever that is. Unpain? Pleasure. That's the word I was looking for. Pleasure. Who knows? If it could start this weekend against Leeds United away from home, that would be jolly pleasant indeed. And a bit later on in the show, we will be getting a Leeds perspective on this game and what sort of a challenge they're going to present to us, etc., etc. So stay tuned for that. And we will now in a couple of moments be talking to our guest about the international break, about the demands, the physical and mental demands being placed on players, the schedules for this season, whether we need to step back and maybe take a look at things and see if there's a way we can do things differently. That's all coming up now in a moment, but I just wanted to touch on a little story which came out just as I've started recording here, a bit of a scrap between two Arsenal players in training. Dani Ceballos and David Luiz having a go at each other. Apparently, Ceballos went in for a challenge. Luiz took exception to it. There was a bit of pushing and shoving, a bit of a scrap, a few punches being thrown. They were separated, then they apologized, and everything is now kind of hunky-dory. And those stories sound very dramatic, don't they? You know, players having at it. Everyone likes to think of their team as this kind of harmonious unit where everybody gets along, everyone loves each other, everybody's got each other's back, and it all goes swimmingly on the training ground, on the pitch and off it. But that's not really the reality. Players fight all the time. This is a competitive environment. Tempers can get a bit frayed, and it's commonplace, I think, at every level of football, let's be honest, for players not to get on and for that to spill over at times. And once it doesn't transmit itself to the 90 minutes, then everything's okay. I mean, I remember some years ago when I was playing football, there was a guy on the team that I absolutely could not stand, and he could not stand me. And in training, it used to get a little bit heated, and you know, there'd be moments where it almost spilled over. But you know, when it came right down to it, the minute we put on those jerseys, the minute we focused on the opposition, when you realize that the job is to go out there and be together and, you know, to play as a team, to look after what's most important for the collective. You know, you're out there, you're on the pitch, and I still thought he was a massive, massive prick. There was literally nothing he could do that would ever change my mind. But I'll tell you this, if you could take 10% of his contitude and give it to him as football talent, he'd be Lionel Messi. That's how much of a wanker he was. Swear to God, I was so glad when he left the team. So there's your training ground anecdote for this particular episode. Right, Let's move on, and I'm delighted to welcome back to the show somebody who we haven't had on for some time to talk about the internationals, to talk about the players and the impact it's having on them, and of course to talk a bit of Arsenal. It's Daniel Storey. Hi, Daniel.
Thank you for having me.
Can I start by talking about internationals and the international break and the impact that it appears to have had on players and looks like it might have in the future? So Arsenal have had 2 players test positive for COVID-19 while they've been away. These international breaks, we've seen extra games squeezed in because it's money for the national associations for broadcasting rights. Is there ever a point where we can sit here and acknowledge the fact that player welfare is not high on the list of people organising these games, but it becomes an increasingly important consideration as we go forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Quite euphemistically, that I could be a little bit more angry about it. I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's treating players as robots and performing circus animals, and I think the reality is that the only way it changes is if the player associations themselves begin to kick up more of a fuss, FIFA Pro in particular. And I've heard obviously some noises from them this week, I think, about the workload that players are facing, particularly with an international tournament next summer in Europe. So, yeah, we are guilty of this with football time and time again, both in kind of judgment of individual players and their personalities and their lives away from football. And also, I think, in general about this kind of all-encompassing, all-powerful demand for football to be there when we need it, without necessarily judging or taking note of what that means for players and managers.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because international football is something which I think is a little bit divisive. Some people like it, some people love it, some people just don't care for it at all. But as fans, we have this desire to see football, and when football shut down in March and came back in June, it was one of those things which kind of went some way to keep us sane. I think we were all happy to have football back. And part of the reason I think it was not acceptable is the wrong word, but we could see how it might work is because we were told about these bubbles that players were going to exist in, right? So a club could not easily, but put in place protocols and manage the way players trained and everything else. And there was research done into how much contact players have on the pitch and whether that was safe with COVID-19 and everything else. So this idea that, for Premier League and lower league football, you stay within this kind of bubble as much as possible, and everybody had to do their own thing in terms of social distancing and their own sort of bubbles at home. But the minute you bring international football into the equation, that goes pretty much out the window. It's much more difficult to contain the spread of a virulent virus when you're bringing players and staff and managers and all the associated people in from various countries through various airports, traveling by plane, traveling by buses, all of those things. So was it inevitable that one of the consequences of international football was going to be a rise in positive cases for COVID-19?
Yeah, I think that absolutely figures. I think there's probably a balancing act here that is the same balancing act, in fact, that's kind of playing out in inverted commas normal life. In that some things need to be opened up. Anything we do when a virus is raging across the planet, anything is a risk. But everything becomes a calculated risk, and I think they felt that with these bubbles that the players are ideally in, and I think more importantly with the mass testing that is going on at international level, it should be that falls down, I think, in some parts of the world, or maybe associations that are less well off, but for the major nations, this mass testing program is their way of catching it and stopping the spread to other teammates. So I think it was a calculated risk. And I think, to be honest, I think with the Nations League, I can see why they did it. My big gripe with all this, and I'm one of the lovers of international football, but my big gripe is the friendly games, because that felt like it was kind of going beyond the pale on both points. Both that the games were unnecessary and therefore the travel of players was unnecessary regarding COVID, and that the games were unnecessary in with regards to soft tissue injuries and unnecessary strain on players that seemed completely superfluous. There was no need to play three internationals across a 2-week break, as far as I'm concerned.
So how do we find the balance then between, for example, what Gareth Southgate was talking about during the week about how there was sort of pressure? He didn't really go into too much detail, but maybe pressure from club managers regarding the use of players. For example, Bukayo Saka, who's only 19, played 3 games for England, 290 minutes, and he had a 50-odd minute cameo against Belgium, I think. How do you find the balance between player welfare, the needs of an international manager? He said, we need these games. We have to play them. I think the Nations League, a thing I still don't understand, and I've just no interest whatsoever in discovering how it works or what the purpose of it is. They're one thing, at least you can say they're competitive fixtures. But the friendlies, do international managers have a responsibility, not to clubs, but to the players that they bring in to sort of to manage them in a way which doesn't then leave them exposed or more susceptible or culpable or susceptible, I think is the right word, to injury when they go back to play for their clubs?
Yeah, I think it's a really, really difficult issue. It's so layered because I actually feel for managers like Gareth Southgate, in that I think football has become so tribalistic towards the club game that you're right what you said at the top of our chat, that a lot of supporters, and I think it's a growing number of supporters, see international football as something to be mistrusted because players go away and may come back and injured, and an added layer to that this year is that they may also come back contracted with COVID-19. I think that's incredibly hard for an international manager to balance up, because the reality is he's under just as much pressure as the club managers are for his reputation, for his future career, and he thinks, he may think, hang on a minute, you knew these games were coming up. They've always been in the diary. I was always going to pick my strongest squad because I'll get flack if I don't. So I'm gonna pick who I can, and that's very much the natural line. But inevitably there is some give and take with club managers. You've got managers who will have whispers in the ear, who will have good relationships with certain international managers who will say, hang on a minute, if you could just do me a favour and not play him in this one or not play him in that one. But again, I feel for Southgate, the obvious example in this international break is Trent Alexander-Arnold, who picks up an injury having played 6 or 7 games in 20-odd days for Liverpool and starting every one of them. If that injury happens at England training, Gareth Southgate gets the flak for that. Yeah. The reality is this is a build-up, which is, and both the club and international game is to blame, but the managers aren't to blame. It's people way above them.
So, I mean, it's very difficult, isn't it, to think of a way, particularly when you're talking about the best players at a club, because a manager at a club level is under pressure. He needs to get results. He's going to use his best players. Fans, if you said to them, look, we're going to leave this guy out this week. He's one of our best players, but, he's played a lot. We're going to have to leave him out to rest him. Otherwise, he might pick up a serious injury. You leave him out and the result doesn't go your way. The understanding is not quite the same, is it?
No, it isn't. So and that comes down to the kind of increased patience and the kind of almost that consumerist demand for perfection from supporters that is just one symptom of the modern game. There is so much less margin for error and so much less margin for common sense and reason, really, with these things, that you can understand why players feel under enormous pressure to play every week. Because if you are a player that says to a manager, I'm just not quite feeling it this week, 20 years ago, maybe that wouldn't have come out. Now people will find that out, and that will be transposed or warped into this player's mentally weak, or this player doesn't fancy it, or this player doesn't care enough. It's such a hard balance to weigh up.
Yeah, and is it likely to get any better? I know that this season that we're I was going to say enduring. That might be just my Arsenal perspective at this moment in time. But this particular season, when everything is so compacted, the schedule, there was no concession, for example, by leaving out the League Cup or anything like that. We've still got Europa League. We've still got Premier League. We've got League Cup. We've got FA Cup. We've got internationals. We've got more internationals than ever, in these 2-week periods, 3 games in 2 weeks, and players are expected to come back and do it. If we return to some sort of normality, if there is a successful and a healthy, fingers crossed, post-COVID world that we're all going to exist in, is it likely in any way that we might then step back and say, look, for the good of the players' welfare, from a physical point of view and from a mental point of view, from the good of a fan's perspective, in that the quality of the fare that you're being served up, if you've got players who are fatigued and half injured or playing through injuries, the quality of the football is impacted in some way as well. Is there any way that we might step back and address some of these issues? Because it feels like we've been talking about this kind of thing forever, and if anything, it's getting worse. And I know there are external factors to that, but I also feel like, some of the plans about, the European Super League, the FIFA tournament with X amount of players from, or clubs from X amount of countries, all of these things are just designed to burden players even further, rather than say, look, there is a limit to what we can expect human bodies to do.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. The reality is that those plans and formulated structures are purely from a financial aspect, purely from a broadcasting and a sponsorship and marketing aspect. The more football there is, the more money they can make. But the game is in danger, in my mind, of forgetting who it is that maybe not powers the game in terms of the money machine, but powers the game in terms of the spectacle, and that's the players. And if they are, if your product is diminished through overwork, then eventually that will start to affect the money. It might be a causal effect. It might be a long way down the line, but it will happen. I was surprised that they allowed international friendlies this season. I'm surprised that the League Cup carried on, I have to say, although I suspect that was because they thought if they got rid of it for one season, it might never come back. But yeah, there doesn't seem to have been any kind of resolution or halfway meeting of minds with the players. Will it change? I would say, and call me a cynic, but I would say that the more likely effect is larger squads of players. Is just more players on huge wage budgets, and with the richest clubs being able to afford even more of them. I would say that's a more likely scenario than agreeing to make less money with fewer competitions and fewer matches. But as I say, call me a cynic, but there's plenty of evidence for that.
Sure. I mean, is the only way that it might possibly happen if the players come together en masse to talk about it? But then we go back to that issue that you have before, where nobody wants to be the guy who says, I don't want to play. Well, I mean, it's not so much I don't want to play, it's just I don't want to play this much, or I can't play as well as you want me to play if I'm being asked to play this much.
Yeah, and it's the optics of, as you say, it's the optics of doing that. It's the way, it's the player that puts the head above the parapet. Are they known as a whistleblower for the good of the game and for the good of their peers, or are they known as someone who maybe just didn't fancy it? Football is still, certainly in this country, is still kind of locked into that kind of headspace. I think that admitting any form of weakness is seen as a negative rather than a strength, and I think it would take a large collection of players and a large collection of international players, and I think it will have to be done through PFA, through FIFPro. FIFPro is the one that you think if they can get enough heads together, they can maybe make a suggestion that quite frankly players are being put through the mill. But it goes back to these hardwired views of footballers. People still see footballers as overpaid and earning huge amounts of money for running around, so how dare you moan about it? And the only way they do moan about it is when the product is diminished. Ideally, we would do something before that happens, but I don't really have any faith in that.
Where do you stand on the idea of, not the idea, but the decision that was made at Premier League level to go back to using just 3 substitutes, and the increased talk now about the 5 subs being reintroduced as we saw after the lockdown? It really surprised me that that this was reverted for this season, given all the evidence that people had of how hectic the schedule was going to be and what the physical demands were going to be on players. I know not every club was against it, but we could talk about perhaps the advantage it might give some of the clubs in a moment, but just what we're seeing now in terms of the injuries, in terms of players and clubs being players being unavailable to clubs because they've contracted COVID-19 because they've been away on their travels. It diminishes the squads that they have available to them. Therefore, it increases the physical demands on the players that are there, which then in turn increases the likelihood of injuries and fatigue and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, would you be happy to see a return to that? It is coming in the EFL. The Premier League is now about the only holdout.
Yeah, I'm holding my hands and say I got this completely wrong. I thought that I both wasn't surprised that the clubs voted against it, and I was kind of reassured. I did see it as this kind of fairly heavy weighting towards the biggest clubs, and I think that probably is still true. The depth of quality they will be able to have on their bench is higher than other clubs. I've no doubt about that, and it gives those managers more options, not just from an injury point of view, because if you allow those subs for injuries, you also allow them for tactical reasons as well. But as I say, I got it wrong, because the sheer number of injuries so far this season means that I think it will go back to the 5 subs, and I think we will fall in line with EFL and the rest of Europe. And, it should be said in my part defence that various clubs have changed their minds on that as well. They clearly saw, the majority of the Premier League saw it as weighted toward the big clubs, and they may well still think that, but they also are now looking at the well-being of their own players and thinking, well, hang on a minute, I think we're just going to have to bite the bullet and go with this.
Yeah, I mean, look, I see that argument. Obviously, when you're a team like Man City or maybe to an extent Liverpool, Chelsea, perhaps, I think there is the ability to field a much more deep bench and perhaps more quality on that bench. But at the same time, I think in general, the level of player at Premier League level is, I'm not going to say standard, but there aren't that many players who stand out way above all the rest, and perhaps the ability to introduce fresh legs, the ability to tweak your team tactically in games to maybe hold on to a lead or to try and stay in a game as well, is something that I think could be quite interesting for managers of the so-called smaller clubs. Like, I don't think the advantage is quite as big as some people have made out.
No, and it should be said that in whatever game is being played, it's a heck of a lot less of an advantage than if you get either 3 or 4 players injured or players with fitness doubts and fatigue who are having to just carry on from the 70th minute onwards. I think we've noticeably seen this season in the Premier League, watching games, throw-ins take 10 seconds longer in the last 10 minutes, and players are placed safer because they're just shorn of all energy. So that provides its own advantages and disadvantages anyway. So yeah, I've completely turned my opinion on it, I have to say. All
right. Well, look, we'll see what happens there. Discussions, we believe, are ongoing. Quite when it might be changed, if it's going to be changed, we don't know, but we'll wait and see. It just strikes me that it would be folly not to, particularly as we are going to have this traditionally hectic schedule over the Christmas period, as well as we always do in English football, with League Cup games, FA Cup coming up in January as well, and all the Premier League fixtures that are going to be taking place. So we'll see what happens there. But look, I want to move on. I want to talk a bit about Arsenal, and we've had a fairly introspective couple of weeks as Arsenal fans after the defeat to Aston Villa. It was sort of sandwiched, it was one part of a sandwich, the middle part of which was the win over Manchester United at Old Trafford, which was obviously positive, but the week before that was a defeat at home to Leicester. So, there's been a lot to chew on, a lot to look at, and I feel sometimes as Arsenal fans we can kind of go around the houses a little bit on this. So I'm curious, from your perspective as a non-Arsenal fan, somebody from the outside looking in, if you like, what do you make of what's been going on at Arsenal in the last number of weeks, and obviously sort of extrapolating backwards a bit from when Arteta took over just under a year ago, or just under a year ago? It was December last year, so we're in November now. The work that he's been doing in that period of time.
I think the strategy and to use the buzz phrase of the time, his philosophy is spot on. I think there's a clear plan in there, and I don't think Arsenal are ever going to move forward sustainably with the budgets they are now forced to operate under in comparison with other members of the Big Six, unless they had that clear philosophy in place. And it also doesn't surprise me that occasionally that philosophy ends in shambolic defeat. You look at Arteta's, his great mentor Pep Guardiola, and even now, when Manchester City collapse, they collapse big. And I think that's what happens with these philosophy managers, that when they have a very strict way of playing, when something undermines that or forces you into adversity, it can be very hard to switch out of it and fix things. And you are more likely to slip further into that adversity within the course of a single match. And I think that's what we've seen from Arsenal. But I think the plan is right. I think my only major sticking point with the plan is, and it's nothing new to say here, is the chance creation and the makeup of that front three, because I fully understand why he considers Mesut Ozil not part of that first team squad now, but he has to find a way of creating more chances, whether that's moving Aubameyang central, whether it's playing Saka wide left. Whatever it is, he has to find a solution to that, because I think that is a major sticking point in that philosophy as a whole. The passing out from the back, I love it. I loved that comment when they said, does it worry you watching Arsenal pass out from the back? And he said it would worry me more if we weren't doing it. I love that. I think that's everything that Arsenal need to be in 2020. But this isn't, this progress isn't going to be a gradual line, that sails merrily towards a wonderful zenith in 2 years' time. There are going to be huge pitfalls along the way, and the hope is that Arteta commands enough patience from fans that they work through those.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we are. It's whether the knowledge that there's a medium-term plan in place here to put things right after they've been, well, wrong is perhaps the wrong word, but they haven't been as good as they should be over the last number of years. It does take time to put those things right. But when you get, walloped at home by Aston Villa and you get sucker punched by Jamie Vardy in a way that pretty much everybody watching that game could see coming, it's difficult to find that balance. It was quite interesting today. He was talking about what he needs to do and the reaction to the Aston Villa game. And he was talking to Be In Sport, and he said, I think you're always tempted after a bad result to change everything you do. And I think that's a really bad temptation, because a lot of things are working and it's really clear on the things that we want to improve on and how we're going to do it. He says now it's time to reflect and be critical about the things that you can improve. So, he's not going to absolutely change his philosophy or change his instructions to the team, but he does have to when a result like Villa happens, and when a performance like Villa happens, and when you're a young manager, remember this is his first job and everything else, even if it doesn't sort of shift you fundamentally from what you think is the right thing to do, it must be the kind of thing from which you take lessons, or you learn lessons, or you look at it and say, well, okay, how do we A, avoid that happening again, and B, how do we address this kind of fundamental issue that is running through the team this season, which is chance creation. It's not just the Villa game, it is something that has been going on for the whole season.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, it might be that Arteta reasons that this is a philosophy that is quite literally built out from the back, that as they have improved passing out from the back, that will eventually move into midfield. And then the final cherry on the cake, if you like, is that they will sort the chance of creation out. That may well be true. We haven't really seen any evidence of that yet. But I do think that the improvements he's made defensively in terms of the style, I think fully vindicate his approach so far. Even forget about the poor results, because they will happen and they happened before. I think that there is something building there. The question is exactly as you say, whether he can do that without, he decides he can do it without a number 10, and that's fine. And it's all very well as live blogging Arsenal matches from his Twitter feed. That ship has sailed now. So he has to find another way through that, whether it's Thomas Partey driving through midfield, whether I say it's Bukayo Saka playing on the left, whether it's Nicola Pepe playing on the right. There's just something not quite clicking there. And my worry is that Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang signed a new contract, and in very recent history there are two very high-profile former and current Arsenal players who signed big new deals and promptly went off the boil, and it would be a great shame if Aubameyang was the third of those.
Well, yeah, it certainly would, but I think there's a need to give him, if he was missing lots of chances, I think we might be more worried. The fact that he's not getting any chances speaks perhaps more to a structural problem, a systemic problem, than a sort of decline in the player himself. And, you're sitting here, and I'm sort of sitting here after the Villa game thinking, we've got to do something different. We have to do something, whether it's in midfield. I think the answer probably lies, in the front three and also midfield, to move the ball a bit more quickly. And you're going to Leeds away, and what a scrap that is going to be against a Bielsa team. And then you're thinking, well, Saka played 3 games for England. Kieran Tierney played 3 games for Scotland, one of them which went to extra time, so he's done 120 minutes and a penalty shootout, and he's done a lot of travelling as well. Aubameyang spent the night on an airport floor. Nicolas Pepe, has gone from one side of Africa to the other side of Africa and back. Players have contracted COVID-19. You still don't know, or they still don't know, who's coming back and in what state. That this is on a Thursday as we're speaking. They're going to be assessing those players, and then you have a training session on Friday, a training session on Saturday, and you're probably going to go to Leeds on the Sunday. There isn't time really to put in place something brand new, is there? For any manager, regardless of the experience they have or anything else, to try and put in place a whole new tactical setup or system just isn't possible in that short amount of time in these circumstances. And that is the mantra of the philosophy manager. It's that we do everything we do to such an extent and in such fine detail, and we repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until it becomes muscle memory. And then you don't need to train those aspects. That as soon as you come back to Arsenal, you click into Arsenal mode and you know how to play. That's what he's working towards. There's almost no issue behind the front three, I don't think. If Arsenal take their chances, it'll create more chances and take them as they have been doing in previous seasons. Everything looks very rosy, I'm sure of that. But it is something he's going to have to solve. I am not too worried about the players coming back from international duty now. I don't think that is when the fatigue will hit in. I think the fatigue will hit in February, March time. I think they will be okay at the moment. But yeah, we're going to have to see something different, because no reasonable Arsenal fan, will get highly frustrated at one-off failure. They will if they see that failure or setback is followed by setback is followed by setback with no obvious change of ethos, because that's when fans begin to worry that players are losing the faith in it. Yeah, that's a fair point. Just very finally, this season's Premier League, if you looked at the last couple of seasons, under normal circumstances, you would have said probably another dogfight between Liverpool and Man City, the two dominant teams in the league. But everything is so up in the air, and things are so strange, and unexpected things are happening now. And I think unexpected things are going to happen in the next 3 months, and also unexpected things in the final 3 months of the season. Are you expecting a season of kind of, whoa, what the fuck was that?
Yeah. I think we've grown to expect it now. The notion of home advantage seems to be almost null. The notion of form even seems to be up in the air. Certainly the notion of accrued form from last season is. My suspicion, and I've been wrong many times before and will be again, my suspicion is that when that fatigue does hit in spring, that the clubs with the biggest resources will kind of move clear from the rest. But that clearly depends on them not being involved in European competition, which I think provides a huge advantage to clubs like Leicester and Wolves and Southampton and then even Everton this season. I still think it will be not a shootout between Liverpool and Manchester City, but I think they will probably be the top two. But you can't say anything with any huge certainty, and albeit in pretty horrible circumstances, that is quite refreshing for a Premier League season.
Okay, well, look, we'll see how it all plays out. I think there are going to be surprises this weekend and every weekend to come. Daniel, good to talk to you again. Stay safe, and thanks a million.
And you, Andy. Thank you.
Thanks to Daniel. You can find him on Twitter at Daniel Storey85. That's at Daniel Storey85. Just a quick update on the thing I mentioned last week, the hashtag ArseBiz thread on Twitter, which is trying to put Arsenal supporting businesses in touch with Arsenal supporting customers, or indeed any customers or any businesses, small businesses leading up to Christmas who've been impacted by the restrictions and everything else regarding COVID-19. We want to try and help you find customers, and we want customers and people out there who want to spend their money with small businesses, you know, a chance to find people who they like and to see their money go a bit further this Christmas in terms of what shopping they're going to do. The thread, the link to it is in the show notes, so you can check it out. You can search hashtag ArseBiz, ArseBiz on Twitter, and you'll find people in there posting up links to their businesses. They tell you what they do, where they are, so maybe there's something there that tickles your fancy. And we are working on a website as well, so we can get all these businesses together and we can have them in one kind of handy page / classified section. So that's coming soon also. But don't forget, if you are a business owner and you want to contribute, just look at the thread, leave your business details. And if you're interested as somebody who wants to spend money with small businesses, just check out the thread as well. Until such time as we can get that website up and running, we'll give you details on the site and, of course, on the podcast when we do. Right, ahead of our trip to Elland Road on Sunday, the first one for quite some time, I thought I'd get a bit of Leeds perspective on this game. I'm delighted to welcome to the show from the Leeds That podcast, we've got Paul. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
I am all right. Let me ask you this first before we get into other things. As an Arsenal fan, we've looked at this international break and seen players go to various corners of the world. We've had a couple of players who've contracted COVID-19 who won't be available to play on Sunday. We're slightly worried about certain players in terms of fatigue and how much they've played over the international break. Have you guys had to contend with much of that or any of that, or what's been going on?
Yeah, we've had... I don't think anybody has been sleeping on airport floors, but I couldn't believe that.
That's crazy, isn't it?
They weren't in Heathrow Airport or anywhere with an airport lounge, were they?
No, I don't think so. And it seemed quite deliberate as well. Yeah.
We've had... actually, this was highlighted by Neil Warnock, who was angry about one of his players. But Stuart Dallas has played 3 games for Northern Ireland, including one that went to extra time last week.
Right.
We've had Robin Koch, who's played for Germany for across a similar amount of times, including an absolute drubbing by Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Matthias Klich played in a game on Wednesday night as well for Poland against the Netherlands. So, yeah, there have been quite a few, but I think they've come out of this one with a relatively clean bill of health compared to the last international break where we lost 2 central defenders. And we have had a player out with COVID prior to the international break. So the international break actually meant for us that he's served his quarantine period and is available. So this one has been tough on the fatigue, but not bad on the injury front for us, fortunately.
Okay, well, that's good. It'll just be the nuts and bolts of the Premier League and all the other competitions and football they have to play between now and the end of the season, which will knacker the players across the Premier League. So let me ask you, what's it like being back in the Premier League after so long being away and having missed out in, I guess, fairly heartbreaking circumstances last season? What does it feel like to be back with the big boys, where I guess you feel like you belong?
I think surreal is the only word for it, because it's surreal on every front. I've had a season ticket for 18 years. I got a season ticket just at the point when we sacked David O'Leary, appointed Terry Venables, sold Rio Ferdinand at the peak of his career, and then it just blew up the next season. And I shouldn't really bring this up, but the next season we only stayed up by beating Arsenal 3-2 in that classic game. But that handed Man United the title, so
bittersweet.
That one's another bittersweet one. And then the year after, we were awful. And I went to Highbury that year and watched us lose 5-0. And it was, that's my only, and I'm fairly sure you're not allowed to play Thierry Henry this weekend. But he filled his boots. He even came out of retirement to fill his boots against us in the FA Cup in our
That's right. That is right, yeah.
So looking at your injury list and COVID list, I don't know whether they'll be somehow bringing Thierry Henry out. That'd be typical.
At this point, I'd be willing to try anything, given how difficult it is for us to create chances. But
yeah, it's totally surreal, because they've been up and down the country for 16 years in lower divisions, and it hasn't all been terrible, and there's been some real highlights, but there's been some woeful football, and it's great to be back, but we're not back in person, and we for me, for some, I mean, how you choose to consume your football is entirely up to you. And I'm not someone who judges people who don't physically go to the games, but for someone who has been used to going, missing out and watching it entirely on the telly compared to going to all the home games.
Sure.
It feels like a totally different experience.
It is. So, it is a weird thing, isn't it? Because, as Arsenal fans, we missed out on the FA Cup final, for example, and being there in person and being able to celebrate that, and that sort of distance that you feel, whether you like it or not. I think there is a distance when you can't be in the stadium or you can't go to games, even if you're an irregular goer like I am, or attendee, I think is the better word than goer. But, you do miss that connection with the team and the players and everything else. Are you a crowd noise on or crowd noise off guy when you're watching on TV?
On.
Right.
Although, for when I'm watching Leeds games, I don't notice because I'm engrossed in it. But if I was watching a general game, I can't watch it without the noise, because it just looks like a training game. And whilst the crowd noise on definitely makes it feel like FIFA, like a computer game, it's okay. It takes that edge off it, because I don't think if I'm ever watching on the telly, I spend too much time looking at who's in the stands. So it makes it that little bit more normal, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, must be one of the things that's difficult to deal with, having been out for so long and now you're back and nobody can go. I hadn't considered that aspect of it. So tell me about Marcelo Bielsa and what sort of an impact he's had, and how his work has transmitted itself to the team, to the players, and to the fans when you guys were able to be there.
Well, I think it's not even just the club, it's the city, it's the entire ethos. It's when someone comes in like that, whose impact permeates throughout everything. He has taken a team that finished lower mid-table the season before and taken them to champions within 2 years. And the last couple of results haven't been good, but I think we've shown what we can do, and it's a different league. So there is a working out period. So where we end up is still pretty much anyone's guess, but no one would say that we've come up and like Fulham and West Brom have struggled to show any kind of glimpses of real form and Premier League kind of qualities. But I think we've shown that, and it's testament to him that we've been able to do it. It's his philosophy. It's all based around hard work, really, and knowing your role inside out. And it can be like watching a different sport at times, and one of the things that I've always reflected on is that we spent 16 years, and you spend money on the next. Everyone wants to spend the most money on the next forward, or you're spending it because you need a left back. And it turned out spending $4 million on the manager, bringing in someone who knew his stuff, was what it had needed. And he transformed the culture of the club. It's truly, it has been completely transformational. The club at that point to now doesn't look the same thing. It's a totally different thing. And
clearly he's got buy-in from the players.
Yeah, 100% buy-in. Yeah. And those that didn't, because there are players that we've had who you might have thought were better players on paper, but if they didn't buy in and they weren't part of it, they've gone. So, for example, Pontus Janssen, who Swedish international centre-half, he went at the end of the first season, and he'd been a great player for us, and he was a great defender, played at the World Cup, and he picked us up as fans when things weren't great, and you always felt there was something there. But I think ultimately his attitude that wasn't, he didn't fully buy into it. He knew he was great, but whatever it wasn't 100% on board with Bielsa, and he went for $5 million to Brentford, and we brought in Ben White, who was at that point unknown, on loan from Brighton, and he played every game, and the group is so tight knit, and this is a real exaggeration, but I would say that there is potential that we've got the worst paper on team, but the worst team on paper, but the best coach on paper, and that the combination is what makes it work. If you took Bielsa out of the equation and put in almost anyone else, and we'd really struggle.
I just say it's interesting because there's something slightly similar going on at Arsenal at the moment with Mikel Arteta, and what he talks about are non-negotiables. So things that he wants from his players, whether it's their attitude in training or their attitude in the games or their ability to adhere to instructions. It's kind of a vague idea, but the idea is the same. You buy into what I'm doing or you don't. And like what happened to Pontus Janssen, we've had some high profile players who've fallen by the wayside. And it's great when you get results and you get yourself promoted and you're back in the Premier League. When it doesn't quite work or when results aren't going your way, it leaves you open to questioning, which I think is quite an interesting aspect of where Arteta is in his journey as a manager right now.
Yeah, I would say that's one thing. I think in the past, where you could take your pick from managers because we've had so many, but the buy-in hasn't necessarily been there, and that's not just the players; it's the fans as well. So, how well liked and how well respected that manager is will depend on how long it takes the fans, the press, the owners to question them. And that question mark has been such a tiny minority of fans would question Bielsa because of what he's done. He's earned the right to have this point in the Premier League where we've just been beaten 4-1 2 games in a row. And people understand it and accept it and take it on the chin. And I haven't heard anybody say, "Oh, it's Bielsa," and maybe fans of a couple of other clubs, because we have Plan A, and if Plan A isn't working, then Plan B is that you do Plan A better. And
yeah, that sounds very familiar to me right at this moment in time.
Well, he won't change it, but we've been slightly unfortunate with personnel, slightly unfortunate with individual errors, and incredibly unfortunate with VAR lines that are drawn on a pitch.
Oh, yeah.
And those kind of moments hugely change games. But from within, nobody's questioning that. We were really lucky. We got to speak on our podcast with Calvin Phillips about a month ago. And when you speak to a player and you hear the buy-in and the acceptance, and he said, in terms of targets and goals, they're just setting themselves to win the next game. And if they don't win it, the target is to win the next game. and they're that confident that those little things won't affect it. But having the international break at this point and seeing what he does to tweak it in terms of where those goals were coming from, he'll have studied hours and hours of tapes from maybe years and years ago to try and find the little solutions that you tinker to make this right. So for us, it's interesting to see what does come next, because on the face of it, 2-4-1 games do look like a drubbing, but the balance of playing those games and other things, it wasn't quite so, and it truly is fine margins that would need changing in order to make those much more stellar performances that were in line with, or results that were in line with how the rest of the season had gone to that point.
Yeah, it's very interesting this, because, we're coming into this game on the back of a 3-0 defeat to Aston Villa, which was probably our worst performance ever under Mikel Arteta. It was really bad. We had a win over Man United, but we got beaten by Leicester at home, a 1-0. And it wasn't the kind of game in which we were outplayed. It was fine margins. We had a goal disallowed by VAR, which should have stood. And then, of course, Jamie Vardy popped up and fucking Jamie Vardy'd us, as everybody could see.
We got Jamie Vardy'd. There's no shame in being Jamie Vardy'd.
It's just quite interesting that, I'm not speaking for anybody else. I can just sort of sense the mood around the Arsenal fan base and what have you, that, people aren't quite as sanguine about the defeats, as you are about those, which isn't to say you're accepting of them or anything else, but what we're seeing now is two managers who are very wedded to their ideas and the way that they approach the game and what they want from their players, going into a fixture, both of whom have lost going into the international break, and we're sitting here as fans going, what are they going to do to change it? What are they going to do to, make more chances from an Arsenal perspective? What are Leeds going to do to make themselves more defensively secure? It's quite interesting, isn't it, to see these two things come together? It's almost like each manager has got something different to fix.
Absolutely. And I think for us, when Bielsa came in, he told Calvin Phillips had often he'd been played all over the midfield, but often more in an attacking position. And he told him that, from studying the tapes of him, that he'd seen him as a defensive midfielder. Now, and he became, essentially within 2 years, England's defensive midfielder. Taking him out of that equation and playing someone who hasn't really played there exposed us far more. And so if Phillips is back, that kind of answers that one. If he's not, it is more of a question around what he does in this area, because it will be a similar setup to previous. Now, thinking about what you said about the fine margins and the results, we beat Aston Villa 3-0. We could have lost that game 3-0. It was a brilliant performance, but we performed to certain levels. They talk about the metrics and all the other. If you look at our possession, passing completion, all the statistics, they will be very similar across all the games, whether we win, lose or draw. It comes down to those little moments in games that need changing, because we cleared one off the line in the first half against Aston Villa. Grealish should have squared one, but instead ran the length of the pitch and tried to score himself, because for whatever reason. And at those moments in games, we could have been 1-0 down or 1-1 or various points. And we went on to win 3-0. So it's really about it truly is about how the fine margins come. But those kind of games where teams have set up to attack us or try and play on the front foot rather than sit tight, sit deep, and then punish us with their pace or pounce on mistakes, we've done better in those open games. So depending on how, Arsenal come and set up, that's where the chances will be.
Very interesting, because, there is this clamour for Arsenal to do more and be more effective from an attacking perspective. There's plenty of talent there, but we're just not creating the shooting opportunities. And when we miss chances, we're kind of gutted because we know there aren't going to be as many chances as you would like in a game. And our perhaps biggest results have come in games where we've sat and we've let the opposition have the ball, and then we've tried to, work it out from the back and work those channels and give it to Aubameyang and let him score those goals. So, I think Bielsa is obviously a very accomplished tactical coach, and Arteta is somebody in the very early stages of his career, but has spoken about Bielsa and how much he admires him, and working with Pep Guardiola, again a very tactical coach. It feels like this could be something of a chess game on Sunday.
It certainly could be, particularly if Arteta's looking at the way that we've been beaten in the last couple of games and is wanting to play that little bit more compact and realising that there are frailties and there will be chances. It might not be that front foot pressing, attacking football that maybe Arsenal fans would want to see, but you have a great chance of getting a result out of playing the way that people don't necessarily want to see. Yeah. If it's a case of come out and go for the thing that's most likely to get the result, or is it a case of come out and try and do the things that people are clamouring to see them do?
This is where the single-minded manager has to kind of believe in what he thinks is the right way to get the result, rather than not bowing to pressure, but being, bendable to the will of fans. Maybe this is the absence of fans is playing a part in this as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see. Just finally, what is the ambition this season for Leeds? I know after a long time out, just staying up sounds like it would be good, but is there something more that you're looking for from this season? Do you feel like you can do more? It is a weird Premier League season with everything that's going on, and there's the potential, I think, for some surprises when we look at the table at the end of the season. So is that something you're hoping for, confident about, or you're just kind of on the journey and seeing where you end up?
I think before we started the season, the aim was to not be Norwich City as fans, and you're watching it. Then we've come out and I know I'm probably name checking a bit, but we were really proud to get that Calvin Phillips interview. But it's like I was chatting to him, but I don't know him personally. He just talked to us about it. But what he said was that he in the Liverpool game on the first game of the season, they got back in the dressing room and we'd lost a couple of questionable penalties, but they said we've gone toe to toe with the team that absolutely destroyed this division, and it gave them the beliefs that they could go out and get points anywhere. So, and I think that radiated through to the fans, but it's just keeping that reality of genuinely staying up would be an achievement this season, because that especially if Bielsa stays for another year, you're going to strengthen the squad again. And because we do have some players that could have easily ended up the career going the other way and being in League One, and instead they're playing week in, week out in the Premier League. So it's no disrespect to them. They're playing absolutely to the best of their ability. But when we add more strength and get more depth, you would hope that a second season of it, you would be able to start to kick on. Because, when you play teams like Crystal Palace and they've got the potent attacking force that they have, but they're content to sit really deep with, you look and you go, it's just not that enjoyable to watch. And if we could be good, like if we could have the range of players to play this system, it'd be amazing. That's maybe being spoiled. That's where we'd like to be down the line.
All right. Just finally, tell us a little bit about the podcast. And, I know we do have some fans of other clubs who listen to this podcast, and maybe some fans of Arsenal would fancy listening to a Leeds podcast. I don't quite know why, but they might. So tell us a bit about it, and what do you do and when do you do it?
Well, we do a range of podcasts. We do interview podcasts with people connected to the club and the city. We do monthly specials where we play some games and other bits and pieces. But the one that we seem to be doing the most frequently at the moment is the match day podcast. So we will get together before the game and do a preview with team news and thoughts and general musings, and then we record the second half straight after the game with our initial thoughts and feelings on the game, and then put it out a day or so later splicing the two together, and it often makes for, well, it can make for rather drunken ramblings or euphoria, or you get the full mix. So
sure.
If you, it'd be worth a listen, Arsenal fans, if you get a decent result on Sunday afternoon. Come and check out the Leeds That podcast.
All right. You find it wherever you get podcasts and at leedsthat.com. Obviously, I can't wish you luck for Sunday, but thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Very interesting, and good luck for the season.
Cheers. All the best, except for Sunday.
Thank you to Paul. He is from the Leeds That podcast, which you can find at leedsthat.com and, of course, wherever you get your podcasts. Looking ahead to this one, the manager, as we said earlier, Mikel Arteta, has spoken about how he's not going to rip up all his plans and all his philosophies ahead of this game following the defeat to Aston Villa. Nevertheless, there is a need to do something different, to find a way to make the team more creative, to address some of the issues that we very obviously have. And I think if after the Villa game, imagine we had 2 weeks off and he had all his players on the training ground, I think there's time there to do something that might be considered markedly different from what we've seen thus far. The fact that so many players have been away, that we've had some COVID diagnoses, that we may have players suffering from fatigue, a bit of travel weariness, and there isn't much time on the training ground to prepare for this particular game, I reckon this is going to be a bit more familiar than people might like, which isn't to say you can't do things differently. There is still scope to make improvements to the way we do things as a matter of course, but also you can put in place some tactical tweaks. You can change the formation. You're not necessarily changing to something brand new and revolutionary. You can go back to something that the players understand pretty well, 4-2-1-3, a 4-3-3, something like that. Change up the front three a little bit, play Aubameyang down the middle. You could play Pepe on the right-hand side. My idea of playing Saka on the left-hand side, I like it in general, but I do wonder if, having played 3 games for England, it might be a bit much to ask of a 19-year-old player who has played a lot already this season. So, there are things like that as much as we might like to see them, the manager has to look at the slightly bigger picture while also getting a result against a very difficult team to play against in a game in which the pressure is very much on because of what's come before. Not just Aston Villa, but also Leicester as well, you see. So it is a tricky one for Mikel Arteta, but this is the challenge of the job. This is something he is going to have to contend with throughout his career. Pressure at a big club is a prerequisite. That's just not something you can escape. My feeling, as much as I would like to see a much better performance from Arsenal, is that this is a game in which the result is more important than the actual performance itself. You could say on one hand, well, look, maybe the result didn't go our way, but I like the way we played, and we played with a bit more verve and panache and attacking intent. I'm not sure that helps you escape from the criticism of either not winning or losing the game. So I think first and foremost, his decisions will be made about who's fittest, who can last the pace physically, and then about what we might do to try and win this game against a team that are going to give us problems, as we know. Maybe it's the kind of game in which the system which has worked against some of the bigger clubs might just work. I don't know. But I don't know that we're going to see a whole raft of changes. I get the sense that when the team is announced on Sunday at 3:30, there's going to be a lot of discussion about it. But if that team comes away from Elland Road with a victory, then the manager will have done his work and earned his money. If not, then the questions and the analysis will continue, and he's going to have to find a way to start improving results. So this is a big game. It's been a long time, I think, since I've looked at a fixture list, a Premier League fixture list, and thought, oh, that's quite a handy run of games, isn't it? Yeah, we should do well in those. Every single game nowadays feels like a challenge, a big challenge. And maybe that's because of who we are now and where we are in the table and our standing. But you'd love to see both a result on Sunday and the kind of performance which begins to restore a bit of aura about the team that perhaps makes other teams look at us and go, well, I don't actually fancy playing Arsenal today? Because right now I feel like every team in the Premier League would look at us and go, yeah, give them a good game. Not that worried, not that fussed. That is something we're going to have to address. Whether he can do enough between now and Sunday to put that in place, we'll wait and see. But it really is about getting a result. So let's keep fingers crossed. We do have players, we do have talent. They don't always show it. There is inconsistency. But inconsistency means you can be really good one week and not so good the next. So let's hope this is one of the good weeks. James and I will be here on Monday, as ever, with an Arsecast Extra to discuss whatever goes down at Elland Road on Sunday. Until then, have yourselves a great weekend. Thank you for being here as always. Thanks for listening. Do give us a review on Apple Podcasts if you like. That would be really very much appreciated. So until the next one, folks, take it easy. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Arsenal Football Club today announced disciplinary proceedings against new recruit Willie Williamson. The misfiring forward was seen hanging out with a jazz hand sprinkly meat wanker when he should have been home reading a book. Arsenal chairman Sir Kensington Fryer said, "If I find out who gave him a 3-year deal, he's fucking toast." Salt has now been banned from the training ground.